This is panning around, going counterclockwise around the building now, looking pretty much toward the south. You can see the opening where the field will slide in and out. And if you look very closely to your right, you'll see the very substantial columns that will support those enormous trusses, which will form the base of that end of the building, allowing the tray to slide beneath them. So the very prominent structures to your left there are the cores of this building, vertical transportation, elevators, things like that. But they also anchor horizontally the structure. And that's really where the challenge in concrete has come. It's not in the placement of concrete for slabs or decks, but it's in those cores simply because the rebar is so complicated and it's just taking longer. You can see most of we still have a little bit of excavation here and there to go. It's intentionally held back so that there's truck access down into the site. As I was explaining to Mr. Taberti yesterday as we were walking around, there's actually more progress made on the field level than is readily noticeable there, because as they pour up the field wall, for instance, they then cover that with gravel so that the crane and other heavy equipment can operate over top of that. So there's actually a good deal of completed work that's now been intentionally covered by gravel, which will displace the load and eventually be removed once that heavy work overhead is completed. I'm happy to take some questions.
Questions for Mr. Webb?
Mr. Chair, if I may. Did you say item 9 as well, parking, or my favorite subject?
Yes. And I think Mr. Webb may have just addressed 8.
I addressed 8. Would be happy to take questions on 8. You want me to proceed to 9?
Are there questions on 8?
Yeah, I do have one question on 8.
Okay.
Overall labor, ability to get, attract, keep?
So far, it's not been a problem. Could be down the road, and we're monitoring a couple of specific trades, which I'd rather not go into in a public session.
Okay.
But it helps that the design builder is self-performing the concrete, and that's, as I've indicated, not just on the critical path, it is the critical path at the moment. So they're not reliant on a lot of subcontractor labor force issues that may come up. The steel is not a problem in terms of local labor force. And we think we're ahead of the wave in terms of some of the other projects competing for the labor pool where it might be tight. So we don't anticipate a problem, but it is obviously something in a buoyed construction market like this that we have to keep an eye on.
Thank you.
We're not noticing any price escalation on subcontractor bids that are attributable to their anticipated labor shortage, and we have a good pool of highly qualified subcontractors thus far. There's a good deal of satisfaction, by the way, taken in the fact that about $800 million of the construction of the $1.2 billion subcontracting pool is already locked in. It's bought out. And while there could be anomalies to that where we experience unforeseen price increases, that's not very likely since the contracts are already let. It would take some really serious extraneous problem to trigger an increase in any of those contracts. And therefore our contingency fund, which is not diminished by very much at all, as a fraction of the remaining unknowns, if you will, is much higher than when we started out.
And Mr. Chair, maybe a question just on the authority board. Have you started concrete? I haven't been down there in a while. Like a convention center itself.
No, we haven't. We will
So it's
begin to break ground.
Excellent.
Yeah, and actually our 2 projects in particular are phased pretty well. The trades that will be completing at the stadium can move to the convention center. So
yeah.
Thank you.
And Ken Evans for the record. And you already answered the question, because I was wondering, the
You're
situation.
going to ask it again to see if my answer is
No,
consistent?
no,
Okay.
not at all. Just to say thank you, because I was wondering about the concrete situation, but it's not the actual concrete placement. It's the rebar fabrication, it sounds like, before you even pour.
Yeah, that's really what's driving the delay in the concrete. It's not, yeah, look, they have a batch plant on site. We're manufacturing our own concrete on site, and we're not subject to over-the-road trucking problems or delivery problems. And it's not the concrete itself, but in order to pour concrete, as Mr. Hill would know probably better than I, there's an awful lot of preparatory work. It needs to be formed. The rebar needs to be placed, and in the case of those towers, those are highly reinforced concrete pillars holding this building together. So it's enormously congested with steel reinforcing. And to get all that placed, especially when it's 105 degrees outside, can take longer than you expected. Now, when I addressed the resequencing of the schedule, one thing that has not taken place, and these are good, a couple things that have not taken place, which are very good. A contractor often has an incentive to throw money at something in order to accelerate it. And even though they are operating in a guaranteed maximum price with a contingency built into that guaranteed maximum price, as far as I'm concerned, every dollar of unspent contingency is pretty much ours. It reverts to us largely. So I don't want them to throw money unnecessarily simply to accelerate the job. I'd rather do it more smartly than that, and so would they. And the other, so resequencing avoids that, avoids the dilemma of throwing money at the project in order to accelerate it. Also, what they have not done, which I think is prudent, although it may not be completely realistic, they have not anticipated an increase in productivity on that concrete. They're about 30% through the concrete task, and efficiencies as they gain experience, which I don't think is probably realistic. I think they'll get more efficient. But for the sake of managing a schedule and anticipating how bad things could be, and therefore what we need to do in order to correct them, improve them, they have not anticipated an improvement in their productivity. I just think the weather alone will probably facilitate that, let alone their experience going along. And early in a design-build project like this, there are always field changes to the design. And it's hard to deal with those on the fly. They take time and money to deal with them on the fly, whereas later on in the project, that is less the case because the work is essentially being replicated. And so whatever design changes you made in the field early on, you're already aware of those, the next 2 or 3 pours that you do. So I think all of those, to me, suggest the schedule is going to be better than what they anticipate, even with the efforts that they've taken to resequence and recover.
And that was Mr. Webb setting goals for the contractor in public. Nicely done. Any other questions? Okay.
Parking. We completed the required report, which was a condition of our conditional use permit issued by the county about a year ago. The conditional use permit gave us a reduction in the otherwise required on-site parking and reduced that down to roughly 2,400 spots, which we have. The other condition was that we report back to the board, the county commissioners, within a year as to the completion of a parking plan, which we have done. Although this was not an action item on the part of the Clark County Board of Commissioners, it was discussed rather robustly with them about a week or so ago. And I think it's not unfair to characterize that there was unanimity in their approval and acceptance of that plan. The plan generally is a dispersed parking plan. We described how we had looked at Valley High as a potential single shot solution, and it has the apparent advantages of being all in one place, close to the stadium, but with that comes some additional challenges, namely congesting everything at the stadium. And there were also some cost and legal issues associated with the actual acquisition of Valley High and converting it to parking, let alone the entitlement, especially with an environmental review, which would have been required in order to build a pedestrian bridge over Interstate 15 in order to actually make it work. And all of those things conspired to make Valley High impractical. And so as a result, not just as a result, but in consort with that, we looked at a number of other off-site locations, and not just one off-site location, but several of them, so that we could not only remove the congestion from the site, but disperse the parking activities. We're fully expecting that approximately 20 to 25,000 people will walk from the strip properties across Hacienda to the stadium, and to that end, we're working with Bill Ham and the other folks at MGM to activate Hacienda as a pedestrian pathway, a pedestrian mall on large event days, and provide entertainment opportunities on their way over to the stadium and on their way back, all contributing to a fantastic game or event day experience, which is ultimately what we're looking for. In addition to that, and the on-site parking, we have lots secured essentially at the corner of Warm Springs and Las Vegas Boulevard, which if you drove the speed limit across Warm Springs to Dean Martin Boulevard and up to the stadium, if you drove the speed limit, you would A, be very exceptional, B, probably a menace because everyone else is doing twice the speed limit. But if you did that, you would arrive at the stadium about 5 minutes later. We believe that we can provide a first-class parking transportation experience from those lots to the stadium and avoid congestion at the stadium. We have other lots secured through leases with the Orleans and other properties, again, to disperse the parking. It would be ideal if we had 4 points on the compass, but we have 3 at this point, and we're continuing to look at other options. The other thing that we emphasized in discussing this and presenting it to the Board of County Commissioners was parking is never going to be a static issue. It's going to be dynamic. People's transportation options will change over time. People's habits will change over time. The stadium mix and other events occurring in the neighborhood will occur over time. There are just so many conditions that should cause us to constantly be rethinking parking and transportation that it's difficult and I think impractical to say we have a solution and that's the solution for the next 30 years. This will be dynamic. It'll change between now and the time we open the building, and it'll probably change frequently throughout the course of 30 or 40 years in operating the building.
Questions for Mr. Webb? Mr. Romo?
If I may, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, where do I start on this subject? We have had ongoing dialogue, as you know, and I'm going to speak somewhat as obviously the representative of MGM and the major landowner directly across from all of this activity. And we all know, this community knows all too well that we all now charge for parking. And so the essence of MGM not benefiting from this is not lost on us. Yet, despite that, what would be perceived as an opportunity, I still remain, and frankly, this commission left some of this within the county's purview to handle, concerned by where we ended up. My company remains very concerned, and although we clearly can be a net beneficiary to some of this activity, we are particularly on an event day that potentially isn't even a Sunday afternoon football game, but on a Saturday, we are petrified we're going to get choked out, is I think the key word. And so where I left this subject, because I too, like you, went off to Asia for 2 weeks, was that we were going to continue to work on it. So Mr. Webb, I think I've heard you say we're going to continue to work on this plan. It's my understanding with Mr. Bedane as well. And I look forward to that because our company remains extremely concerned with where we are. We base it on some facts. When we opened T-Mobile, we also had a perimeter plan. We had people parking in off-site locations that were going to be bussed in, And today, to your point, things continue to change, with the exception of a couple of pub crawls. We ended up building the what now is the Excalibur garage, another 3,000 space garage, because it didn't work. People found their way in. And so I'm most concerned with events that will attract a lot of locals and ultimately squeeze out tourism and tourists. And I'm further concerned by, it appears to date, some of the monorail extension that we've hoped for in the community has some concerns in front of it that may or may not get that accomplished, particularly by the end of 2020 or into 2020 at the very least, frankly, if at all. I think, as I remember the study, that was 6,000 people an event, potentially could be delivered, give or take. And so I'm going to ask this committee to support an open dialogue on this subject. I would welcome as well with our company, and I will reach out, because I'm not looking to do anything but solve this, because it's in all best interest to do that. But where this sits today, just know, as this commissioner and representing the company I represent, which is the substantive impacted landholder here, we're not where we thought we would be at this point. So I have no other comments or questions. Thank you.
It would be disingenuous for us to suggest that we are completely satisfied.
I recognize that, but
And it is important to call everybody's attention and remind everyone that the county is interested in parking, the stadium authority is interested in parking, but we, the stadium operators and the Raiders, are vitally interested in it, because it has to do with the satisfaction of the people coming to our events. And that satisfaction doesn't just occur or fail to occur once they've gone through the turnstiles into the building and hit the exit door on their way out. It's the entire experience, from the time they buy their ticket, make the decision to buy their ticket, the time that they travel to wherever they're going in order to get to the stadium, getting into the stadium, certainly what happens inside, and then leaving and going back home. And if any one of those legs is fraught with problems, it tends to pollute the entire experience. So it's not just important to you, it's vitally important to us. And that's why this just isn't something to tick off the box, or even, frankly, to satisfy the stadium authority. This is something that's fundamental to our business and our successful operation of this facility.
I appreciate those comments, and I concur. So I look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Webb. And I talked to Mr. Bourdain about this too, and I know it will be an evolution, and you're continuing to work on it. Just to mention it here, because I've mentioned it here before and mentioned it publicly recently. I think the NFL games will be the easiest events, large events, to accommodate outside the tailgating experience, maybe. And I know you deeply care about that. My concern, and I'd like to focus to be at some level at least on what the experience will be for our customers who are at an event on a Thursday night when it's cold and rainy in February maybe, and they get out of the stadium in the dark. And what I think that's the most difficult, particularly when it attracts a lot of locals. Because getting back to the Strip, I know the Strip will make sure that is a great experience for their customers. But obviously, the local driver will take more parking than the Strip customers will. So, and I know you're aware of that, but I just thought it would be worthwhile to just mention it.
There is something else worth mentioning, and that is, we're not upon opening day. I emphasize the remaining days, and believe me, we feel each one of the 680 days remaining, but we're not ready to open the stadium yet. And during the course of the next year, at least, we'll be not just studying parking, we'll be developing parking and an operating plan for each one of these locations, and a sound transportation network with RTC and others in order to make that a first-class experience. So we're happy to continue to talk about it. We're happier to continue to work about it.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll open agenda item 10. Mr. Guerrero?
Mr. Chairman, agenda item number 10 is to review and potentially approve the bylaws of the Clark County Stadium Authority. This is an action item or an item for potential action. This is for possible action, excuse me. If you go to tab 10 in your board binder, this is the bylaws that were reviewed with the Stadium Authority Board at your last meeting. There have been no changes to the documents as they are currently structured. Mr. Chairman, if you'd like us to walk through them, I'm more than happy to do it. I want to thank Ms. Otto for joining us here today. They were, of course, instrumental in getting both the bylaws as well as the conflict of interest policy drafted. And so she's also here to answer any questions should any pop up. So.
I think this is the second time we've seen these, so I'll just throw it open for questions, I think. Anybody have any questions with bylaws, comments, recommendations? If not, I'd entertain the motion to approve our bylaws.
I'll move for approval.
A motion? And a second? Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks. Thanks for your help, Ms. Otto. Agenda item 11.
Agenda item 11, Mr. Chairman, is review and potentially approve the conflict of interest policy of the Clark County Stadium Authority. This is also for possible action. Similarly, this was the conflict of interest policy.
I have to say one thing while he's talking about that. When this originally started, I want to show you something. The link to this, okay, went to another live stream. It went to this one, all right? This, look at this.
Questions or comments on the conflict of interest policy?
That one, okay?
Entertain a
And
motion to approve that.
thankfully,
Motion in a second.
a gentleman on Twitter alerted me. He said it's playing.
Aye.
Same YouTube channel here, okay?
Okay.
So they had
Mr. Chairman, agenda item number 12 is review and
This
potentially
guy.
approve
So they
amendment
had
number
it,
1 to the Stadium Dispersing Agreement.
they had it on
between
dual
LV
channels.
Stadium Events Company LLC, the Clark County Stadium
So let me get back
Authority,
to this.
and Fidelity National Title.
The point is the
Insurance
link
Company.
didn't work from the
And this is,
website.
the
All right.
second time that this item has been brought before the Stadium Authority Board. At their last meeting, we discussed it. This is the amendment that is designed to provide a streamlined process for the review and approval of conditional and unconditional waivers to ultimately ensure that the processing of payments is as efficient as possible. The Stadium Authority Board remains protected by Nevada lien law. Again, the changes here into section 5.09 and 4.03 are to provide clarity relative to the process and ensure that the provision of all information to all parties is made. It has been reviewed by legal counsel. There's been no changes since the last meeting, and so it's presented here for the Stadium Authority Board's review and potential approval.
Questions on the dispersing agreement amendment? Mr. Evans?
Ken Evans for the record. Just a quick question. Assuming we approve this, and I think we will, how soon would we start the process of receiving the list or seeing the list at our meetings?
Mr. Evans, for the record, Jeremy Aguero, the answer to that question is that we are prepared to begin immediately. We want to make sure that the payment process is as efficient as possible. The Stadium Authority Board has indicated that we are to operate that way, essentially make sure that all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, but that we take out any obstacles that could create a delay. This falls under that. As I mentioned in our staff report, Mr. Haynes has been working on compiling that list from our end, and we'll be prepared to almost simultaneously with this provide that. We would have provided it to them in any event, but we are prepared to send it in the list as required by this amendment immediately.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Entertain a motion to approve.
Ken Evans, so move.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks. Agenda item 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item number 13 is to review and potentially approve the Las Vegas Stadium door and columns operation agreement between Clark County, the Clark County Stadium Authority, and LV Stadium Events Company, LLC. This is in under tab 13 in your board binders. Essentially, there are certain alternative materials and methods of construction requests that have been provided by Stadco and are currently ongoing between Stadco and Clark County. These reflect the operations of the lanai-style doors that you've seen in all of the representations, as well as the columns that support that tray that's going to move the field in and move the field out. There are specific operating requirements that are included in those. Clark County has been working with Stadco in order to come up with what is included here, the stadium door and columns operating agreement. Clark County sent a note to the Stadium Authority Board requesting that it be reviewed and asking that the Stadium Authority Board be prepared to take action on this by the end of the year if deemed necessary. The staff provided this information to Ms. Otto and her team, who reviewed it and has provided preliminary comments back to the county. It is my understanding that the county is continuing to work with Stadco to work out some additional details. It is put on the Stadium Authority Board's agenda today based on the policy that has been, the policy instruction to staff that Stadium Authority does not want to, if at all possible, does not want to see an item and then vote on it in the same meeting. It is provided here for initial review. We will continue to go back with the county and Stadco as necessary and appropriate and facilitate this wherever possible. The objective here is that should there, in the very unlikely event, be some other operator at some point in the future, that these operating agreements be reflected in any subsequent agreement also, so the Stadium Authority Board is aware that that happened and will continue to include that as part of its documentation. Ms. Otto and her team ensured that this agreement is consistent with the development agreement, the lease, and all of the other project documents that the Stadium Authority Board previously reviewed and has approved. Mr. Chairman, Jerry Stevie, the Director of Building and Fire Prevention, is with us here today. Should the Stadium Authority Board have any additional questions or comments relative to this, I think it's relatively straightforward. It lays out the developer's responsibilities and ultimately the Stadium Authority Board's responsibilities relative to this, again, subject to review and comment by council in the ultimate form of that document. We expect some changes when it's brought back to you in November, should that be the course that is appropriate, and we will keep the Stadium Authority briefed as this continues to develop.
Any questions on this item for Mr. Guerrero? Okay, so agenda item 13, open agenda item 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item 14 is to consider and potentially authorize the May 2018 transfer of appropriations between functions within the various funds as shown in Exhibit B in accordance with NRS 354.598005. Mr. Chairman, I think I can make this relatively clear. When the Stadium Authority adopted its 2018 budget in May of 2017, there were only two funds that existed, the Stadium Authority Fund and the Capital Projects Fund. At that point in time, the basic idea was that the Stadium Authority Fund would collect all the room tax revenue and transfer it to the Capital Project Fund for the construction of the stadium. Since that point in time, the Stadium Authority Board has created a debt service fund consistent with the necessary practices for budget, for the administration of the Stadium Authority's budget. What this agenda item is intended to do is move $1.7 million in interest earnings from the Capital Projects Fund to the debt service fund so that it can ultimately be transferred in and put into that second year reserve that we talked about before. Unfortunately, because the Stadium Authority Board approved the budget early on, an augmentation is necessary in order to facilitate that transfer. This is a item for potential action for the board.
Any questions on that for Jeremy?
Ask questions.
Okay.
Where's the budget? They don't ask.
I'd entertain a motion to approve.
You should definitely approve it, but ask.
A motion and a second. Any
Wow.
further discussion?
No discussion.
Say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great.
They don't care.
I will open agenda item 15, which is public comment. Is there any member of the public that would like to address the board? Sure. Mr. Kiberti?
Would it be appropriate to discuss something totally idea and a suggestion I have at this point, or is it too late?
It's probably not agendized, so you can make a comment, having a discussion.
I want to make a comment that off around town, I've heard people ask me once in a while about what's happening to booking of the stadium for other things, and I'm not fully informed about all this, but I thought maybe it would be appropriate that if staff and you, and certainly Mr. Hornbuckle and Mr. Newcomb, who are involved in stadiums and bookings, as to what's the format of that going to develop into, and if we could develop an internal thing to put it on the agenda in a way just to ask for an update periodically of how Stadco or whoever is going to run and book the stadium in the future for events that I know are 2 and 3 years out, and I know you're familiar with that. I think it would be wise if we could introduce that somehow into our discussions in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, great, we will do that. Good afternoon, sir.
Chairman Hill and members of the board. I'm very encouraged to see the community benefits plan because we get a lot of questions.
We all know you, but.
Shondell Newsom for the record. Some new marketing, also the chairman of the board for the Urban Chamber of Commerce. A lot of times at the Urban Chamber, we get a lot of questions about the community benefits plan and the updates and what's happening. And I'm very encouraged to see that we're meeting our SBE goal and having the diversity and inclusion. And what I'm really encouraged about is, you know, on the back page, I saw that we had an SBI intern. My company does a lot of internships. And so we are so excited all the time to see that we're engaging our youth at this level. And I'll just say this, that I'm a huge New York Yankee fan, but the reason I'm a Yankee fan is because Willie Randolph, when I was in the 2nd grade, gave us tickets for getting an A on our report card. So engaging the youth is really encouraging to me, and I hope that we continue that process. I know I talked to President Mark Bedane, and they already do a lot of things in the Bay Area. Believe it or not, I have grandkids that are in the Bay Area. So the Raiders have always been great community stewards, and so we're transferring some of that work here in our valley, which I'm really proud of. I'm really encouraged to see these numbers. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Newsom. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Joe Cato, and I wanted to publicly thank the Las Vegas Raiders, and I'll say Las Vegas Raiders, for their community involvement and engagement. I worked on a project for the past 6 months with our military and veterans and first responders, and the Raiders were a community partner, and we want to thank them because of the work that they're doing in the community with their outreach to and in North Las Vegas, and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, we do appreciate what the Raiders have done in the community. Made a real impact, and obviously in advance, well in advance of permanent operations here. So thank you for that. Okay, with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Can I have so moved?
Thank you.
Yeah, what happened was this started. I apologize because a lot of it was missed because if you went from the website to the
would you know what to do to save someone's life?
if you went from the website to the YouTube channel link, it didn't take you to the Stadium Authority. It took you to another pre-recorded broadcast. So it's a black box situation where I saw that, then I saw basically no one tweeting about it except Rich Vallada of the Review Journal, and who was kind enough to say he would check why. Okay, and all right, and then there was a person who actually tweeted the right link. So how am I to assume but that no one checked it? Something happened? Accidents happen all the time. Regardless, thanks to Bruce Serra, I suppose, and you know, so I'm just going to say that there are people who are, how do I say, want to insult you on with not they're using their real name on social media. Those are people that get blocked all the time, right? But the point is that there was little tweeting on this, and they didn't. And once again, the board didn't ask any questions regarding the budget. So this budget was present. So we got out of what I got out of it was Don Webb. What I was able to see, Don Webb gave a presentation on the stadium, and he basically tried to paint a pretty picture on the fact that there are certain processes with respect to stadium construction that are taking longer than they would like. But with that, he believes that they are slightly ahead of schedule. Now, how you can be slightly ahead of schedule and then at the same time a number of processes like the steady rebar taking longer is a head scratcher. But Stephen Hill, the chair and the new executive director of the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, gave a hint as to what was going on when he said, and that was the head of stadium construction sending a message to contractors regarding the timetable. And that's essentially what Webb was doing. Webb was saying, you know, we're going to be on time, but on the other hand, there are certain processes that are taking longer. So I took that to say, you know what, you're not going to be on time. So there's definitely a problem there, without question. And it's, you know, there should be a better system of getting information to the public that is a lot more apparently transparent than what they present here. I'm actually switching over. If you have comments, you're writing them. I'm actually switching over right now to see if I can catch your comments. I just simply, once I got the link from the gentleman on Twitter, I just went ahead and started live streaming. I didn't try to figure out which browser to use best. I like to use Chrome. I was on Firefox. I just simply fired up the live stream operation and went for it so I could record and make comments, because the way that they have this live stream set up, they being the Clark County, it's one long go. There's no, it's not segmented. So this will be the only segmented representation of the live stream, unless of course there's a Facebook representation I was able to find, which happens. So, you know, but no, that, I can see there are any comments, so I haven't missed anything. But that's the situation. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to shut the stream down and come back later tonight and make some notes about what was said and move forward. Thank you for watching Zenny62. Good night.